So as part of today's agenda, we will see what is data and what are databases. Okay. So what is data? Data is nothing but the information that we collect from various sources. Okay. So the information that we collect from various sources is called data. For example, if we take a Gmail application. Okay. So let's have a Gmail application where a user wants to sign up for a Gmail account. So in that process, he will be providing his first name and then the last name, and then let's say date of birth, and then the user ID he wants, and then the password. Okay. Let's say there's an option for address also. Okay. So once he enters all this information will be saved in some secure place. Okay. So let's say this application is hosted on a server. Okay. And then all this information which the user enters, all this information will be sent to the server. And then from that server, it will be sent to a place where all the data will be stored. Alright. So let's say this is some Excel file or some text file. Text file or some Excel file. Okay. So all the information which is entered by the user will be sent to the server and then to the text file to store that information in the text file. So once that information is stored in the text file, and then when the user wants to log in to the Gmail account which he created, okay, he will be providing his user ID and password. Alright, so he will be providing his user ID and password. So what happens when he provides this information? It will again send back to the server and to the text file, and then it will see if that user already exists. Okay, that means it will verify if the user ID and password, if it exists in the text file. If it exists and if it matches everything, then a reply will be sent back to the server and to the Gmail application saying that the user ID and password provided is correct, and then it will authenticate the user to enter into his Gmail account. Okay, so the information here helped us to authenticate the user. So all this information which has gone through all the process from application to server and then to text file, all this is called data. Okay, so data is nothing but the information that we collect. Okay, so in our case, we collected the information through a web form in the Gmail application. Okay, so all the fields which will be shown to the user, like the first name, last name, date of birth, all this is called some kind of a web form. Okay, so all that information is used to authenticate a user to give him access to Gmail account. So this information is called data in this particular case. Okay, and then it helped us to make a decision whether to authenticate the user or not. Alright, so if we take another example, let's say we have a company A. Let's say company Dell. Okay, so Dell manufactures computers, laptops. Okay, so let's say in 2012 Dell started manufacturing computers. Okay, and then it started doing business in Illinois and Texas, in 2 states. Okay, and then in 2012 Dell has done some business both in Texas and Illinois. So in Illinois, let's say it has sold 10,000 computers. Okay, and then in Texas it sold 20,000 computers. Okay, in 2012. So that's the criteria of 2012. That means that's the sales that happened for Dell in 2012. So in 2013, when the manager, he wants to make a decision on manufacturing computers. Okay, now he wants to know the number, like how many computers he wants to manufacture for 2013. So to make that decision, he just cannot come up with a magic number. Okay, so he needs to have some reference. So that for that reference, what he will do is he will take a look at the 2012 sales data. That means he will have all the sales data for 2012. So he will look at it, saying, okay, in Illinois, the Dell sold 10,000, and then in Texas 20. So by looking at this number, he will come to a conclusion that, okay, let me manufacture 15,000 for Illinois and 25,000 for Texas. Okay, because the market for computers has been growing every year. Okay, so taking into consideration that fact, and then other fact is last year in 2012 10,000 got sold and then 20,000 in Texas. Okay, so looking at this data, he may come to a conclusion saying 15,000 he can manufacture for Illinois and then Texas 25,000. Okay, so that's the number he will come up. So how did he come up with that number? Using two references. One is the growth for the computers, it's growing, and then by looking at the numbers from the past. So in this case, the data from the past, that is called history data, because it's already history. 2012 is history for 2013, right? So he looked at the history data, historical data, and then that data helped him to make a decision to create or to manufacture computers for 2013. Okay, so in this example, the data helped him to make some decision. So the data is very important for that manager to make decision. Okay, so similarly in every organization, historical data or the data will be used in various ways, okay, to make a decision for the future or to predict the future of the company. Okay, so in our example, manager can predict his future, his company's future in Illinois and Texas. By looking at the data, he can say, okay, I am sure that around 10,000 or more than 10,000 number of products will be sold in Illinois, and then 20,000 or more, or maybe close to 20,000 will be sold in Texas. Okay, so he can predict the future, and then he can also make a decision like what he needs to improve to make more sales in Illinois, or what went wrong last year. Okay, by taking feedback of all the customers from 2012. Okay, so all this, if he wants to make decisions, he needs some kind of data, and that data is very important, and then that data, it will be useful for him for the future. Okay, so that is the data. And then this data, as it is very important, we need to store it in some secure place, because we are going to use that data in future. All right, so we need to store the data in a secure place so that we can retrieve that data or work with that data in future. All right, so that is called data, and then that there's a need for storing the data. All right, do you have any questions till now? I'm just talking about the basics, very basics of data, so it should be pretty easy to understand. Okay, so if you have any questions, please ping me in the chat window, or if I don't see any message, I'll just continue. All right, let me continue. So all the information which we provided in this examples which we talked about is all like first name, last name, all characters and numbers. Okay, like first name and last name are characters. Characters in the sense alphabetics. Okay, and then the date of birth consists of numbers like the year, the month, and then the day. Okay, and then maybe the time also. Okay, so all these are numbers. So data doesn't mean only characters and numbers. It means more than that. For example, if we take a Facebook application, we will be writing some articles or uploading some documents or uploading some images or video files or audio files. All this information, how does the Facebook handle it? It will store all this information in some secure place. So it's working, or it's dealing with not only with the characters and numbers, but it's also dealing with various other images, documents, or video files or audio files, whatever it may be. Okay, so all this is also called data. So the data, what is the type of data? The data type means, let's say, characters, and then integers or decimal values, or images, video files, audio files. Okay, so all these different types of data exist. Okay, so for storing all these different types of data, we need to have some secure place. Okay, and then we need to design our secure place in such a way that it handles all these different types of data. So now let's see, where is this data stored? Okay, so now we know that this data is very important and it needs to be stored in some secure place, because we are going to use this data back in future. Okay, so that secure place is called a database. So what is a database? Database is nothing but is a collection of data. So a database is a collection of data. So all the data, it may be of any type. Okay, so that all that data needs to be stored in a database. Okay, so the database, how does that work? Okay, so if you want to store some data in a database, it will be stored in the form of tables. Okay, so let's take an example. We all know about Excel. Okay, so if we want to store some expenses, or if we want to store some information, okay, so we will open an Excel and then we will create some information in the Excel, and then we will save that Excel file. Okay, so if we want to look at the information that we saved, we will open Excel in future and then we can look at the data. So in the same way, the database also works. So let's take an example. So I want to store all my expenses for every day. Okay, so what I'll try to do in Excel, let's say purchase date. Okay, and then I'll try to create a column expense type. Okay, and then expense amount. Okay, I'll try to create this header. Okay, and then when I want to save some information, what I will do is, if I purchased a first product, okay, on July 1st, so I'll just enter July 1st and then 2013, and then let's say grocery. I purchased some grocery for $100, and then on July 5th I purchased some cloths, and then let's say for $200. Okay, so now I have this information stored in my Excel file, and then if I want to save my sheet name as expenses for July. Okay, and then if I want to store the expenses for August, I'll save it in the second sheet. Okay, so that's how I organize my information. So the information which we provided here this is a column, okay, and then this is another column, this is another column. In my first column I am saving all the data related to date, okay, my purchase date. So all the information which I am providing here, I'll just give it a name as purchase date. And then in the second column I'll be providing the expense type on what I am spending. Okay, so that's my column 2. And then in my column 3 I'll have the amounts which I spent. Okay, so the column will describe particular type of data. Okay, so in this purchase date, or it will hold all the date information. Okay, so and then the expense type will hold all different types of expenses, and similarly the expense amount. So my column will define what type of data I am storing. And then if you look at the second record, okay, so this is called a record and this is called a record. It's also called as row. Okay, you can call it as a row or a record. And then the columns, you can call it as columns or fields. Okay, so now you stored 2 records. That means 2 different records. One record for purchase date on July 1st, and then the second record for purchase date on July 5th. Okay, and then by looking at this information, you will be able to tell all your expenses. Okay, so in the similar fashion, in a database you will have a table with a name expenses for July, and then in that table there will be columns and then there will be records. Okay, so you will create column names as purchase date, expense type and expense amount. And then once you have your table structure ready, that means your table name and then your column names, everything is ready. And when you have done your first purchase, you will insert a record. Okay, so it's exactly the same how a table looks in a database. Okay, so table consists of columns and records, and then you will enter all your information into that table, and then you will give a name to your table. Okay, so in future if you want to look at the data, you will go and look into that particular table. Okay, so here we had one table, and then if you try to create another expense sheet for August, you will have another table, and then you can also create any number of sheets in this Excel. Okay, so similarly you can create any number of tables in database. Okay, so all these tables together is called one Excel file. In a database perspective, all the tables together will be in one database. Alright, so it's just the same as the Excel file. Okay, so that's how the data will be stored in a database. Alright, so a database is a collection of data, and the data is stored in the form of tables. Okay, so now we know what is a database and then how data is stored in a database. Okay, so let's see what is database management system, DBMS. DBMS stands for database management system. Okay, so here in our example in the Excel sheet, if you want to insert another record, that means you did some purchase on another day, and then you want to enter that information in Excel. So what you will do, you will open your Excel file and then you will enter that information as the third record. Alright, so and then if you want to change some data, that means you returned some purchase. Okay, so you returned clothes and then you want to remove this particular record from your Excel file. Okay, so you will come back to Excel and then you will delete this. Or if you want to, or if you returned only $100 worth clothes and then you still have $100 worth clothes, so what you will do, you will come and then update this amount. Okay, so all this is called data maintenance. That means you are updating or inserting or deleting the data from your Excel file. So all this is called data maintenance. So if you want to do data maintenance in a database, you need to have some kind of software to work with the data. That is called database management system. So database management system is a collection of software, okay, which will allow users to work with the data. Okay, so the database management system will have a kind of a interface between the users and then the backend database. So it will create a user interface where users can come in and then they can work on the data. Alright, so that is called database management system. Do you have any questions in database management system or a database? Alright, let's continue. So now we know that we have a software which will work as an interface, or which will create an interface between the users and the database for the users to work with the database. One of that database management system is called Relational Database Management System, that is RDBMS. Okay, so RDBMS is one of the database management systems, and then this database management system, the RDBMS, is most widely used by all of the database management systems available in the market. Okay, so most of the corporations will be using this relational database management system. So what is relational database management system? In a database, we said the data is stored in the form of tables. In a relational database, the data is also stored in the form of tables, and a relationship is maintained between these tables. Okay, so relational database management system is nothing but it will store the data in the form of tables. Okay, and then a relationship will be maintained between these tables. Okay, so we will see how that exactly happens. Okay, so in this example, let's say I have another column. Okay, let's take another example. Actually, I'll try to delete that data, and then let's say I'm trying to store some customer information. Okay, so I want to store the customer information for a Gmail user who signed up. Okay, so what I will do, I will create a customer ID. Okay, or let's say customer first name, and then I'll say customer last name, and then the user ID, customer user ID, and then let's say password. Okay, so let's take the first customer as first name as Robert, and then let's say last name as Dylan, and then let's say his user ID is robert123@gmail.com, and his password is password123. Okay, and then I have another customer called Chad Miles, and then his user ID is chad123@gmail.com, and then his password is 1234. Okay, and then let's say I have another customer called Robert, and then his last name is also Dylan. Okay, but his user ID can't be robert123@gmail.com because the Gmail ID is unique. Unique means it's different from each person. Only one user ID can have same characters. Okay, so if another person with Robert and Dylan, if he wants to create the user ID with this 123, which is already existing, he will not be able to do that. Okay, so maybe he will do robert1234, and then let's say his password someone. Okay, so now I have these three customers. So if I want to identify each customer, okay, what information can I use to identify each customer? If I say Robert, I have two Roberts. Which Robert you are referring to? You cannot know. Okay, you cannot use last name because last names also may be same for two different customers in this world. Okay, and then if you use user ID, for sure you know that user ID will be different for each customer. Even if all his information, date of birth, if everything, even if everything matches, you can identify every customer with a user ID, because every customer will have a different user ID. So if you say Robert123, that means you are referring to this particular record. If you say Robert1234@gmail.com, you are referring to this particular. So this particular column is called unique identifier for each record. That means it will identify each particular record separately. Okay. So now if you want to store all this address of customers, so what you can do, you can create another table. Let's say in my sheet 2, I will try to create a address table, okay, to store all the address information. Let's say address line 1, and then let's say city, state, and then country. Now I want to store Robert's address. So what I will do, I'll say let's say Legacy Drive, and then city as Plano, and then state Texas, and then USA. Okay, and then for second record Chad Miles, I want to store his address as, let's say, USA Drive, and then Chicago, Illinois, and then USA country. And then for Robert, the third Robert, let's say he stays in some other state, in some other place. Okay, let's say Road 1, or and then city as Miami, and then let's say Florida, and then country USA. Okay, so I have all this information, but then if a new person comes in, I know that my Robert address is this one, and then second Chad Miles address is this, and then third Robert is this information. But then if a new person comes in, okay, and then looks the data for these two different tables, okay, so how can he identify which address refers to who? Okay, there's no identifier saying this information is related to Robert, or if this information is related to Chad. Okay, so for that reason I need to have some identification here. Okay, so what identification I'll take? User ID, because it will identify each record separately. Okay, so if I take customer first name, and then if I put it here, let's say customer first name, and then if I put it here, this is Robert and this is Chad, and then this is Robert. Now again, if I look at these two records, both these two address refers to Robert, and then if I go to here and then see in this information which Robert I am referring to, I do not know. For that reason I'll use the user ID column. Okay, so that particular value I'll put it here, Robert123, and then here I'll do it as 1234, and then for Chad I'll use his email ID. Okay, so by looking at this information, you can say this address information is related to this Robert, the first Robert, and then Chad is related to Chad. Okay, and then this third information is related to third record. Okay, so user ID, customer user ID. So that column helped me to identify or to relate these two tables. Okay, so this column maintains the relationship between this customer table and address table. Okay, so that is called a relationship. So in future, if you want to get all information about Robert, what you will do, you will go to customers table, and then you will get his first name, his last name, his user ID and password, and then you will go to second table where his address information is saved, and then you will give the using this email ID, you can get the address, you can get the city, you can get the state and country. So now you have all the information for Robert. Okay, so that's how the relationship is maintained between two tables. So if the database is designed in such a way that the data is maintained in the form of tables and the tables are related with a relational key, that is called relational database management system. All right. So now we know what is a database, what is a database management system, and what is a relational database management system. Okay. Now we used Excel file to work with all this data. Okay. So how do you work with the database? So there needs to be some kind of language to work with the databases. So that language is called SQL, structured query language as it stands. Okay, so structured query language. So SQL stands for structured query language, and then this SQL is pretty simple. Okay, so it's not like Java or C# or any other coding language. Okay, so once you learn SQL, you will be very eager to write SQL queries, or SQL queries means SQL code. Okay, so it's pretty easy, it's easy to understand, and then it's easy to read. Okay, it's easy to learn. All right, so the SQL is called structured query language, and SQL is a language used to work with the databases. It may be any database, but then the basic concept of SQL will be followed in all databases. Okay. So what are different databases we have in the market? So every vendor, okay, like Microsoft has its own database created, okay, DBMS or RDBMS, okay, and then Oracle has Oracle, and Sybase and MySQL, and then IBM has DB2, and then similarly Microsoft has also a database called Microsoft SQL Server database. Okay, so for our training purposes, we will be using Microsoft SQL Server as our database to learn SQL. All right, so if you don't have Microsoft SQL Server installed on your computer, that's fine. I will provide you a step-by-step video where you can watch that video and then you can install Microsoft SQL Server. Okay, so Microsoft SQL Server, it has various versions from Microsoft, and then there is a free version also. Okay, so 180-day free trial version, so you can use that version and then you can learn SQL, and then you can learn databases and other database objects. Okay, but then if you learn SQL on Microsoft SQL Server, you can also work on Oracle or on any other database, because the basics of SQL is same across all the databases, all different databases, even if it's a different database from a different vendor, but the concepts of SQL and then the basic coding of SQL will be same. Each vendor may use SQL in their own way. That means they may develop according to their software, but once you learn SQL in one database, it's not so complicated to work with other databases. You can just say you can work on other databases also. Okay, because the concept will be same, and then the coding is also almost the same, but then there will be changes here and there in the syntax. Okay, so SQL is a language to work with the database, and then as I said, we have different databases, and then we will be using Microsoft SQL Server as our database. So let's get started with Microsoft SQL Server. Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay. So now let's see if Microsoft SQL Server is installed on your computer. Okay, so Microsoft SQL Server, it's installed on my machine, and then once it's installed, you will see a icon called SQL Server Management Studio. Okay, it's also called as SSMS. It stands for SQL Server Management Studio. So SQL Server has different tools. Okay, so to work with databases or to work with any other business intelligence. Okay, so SQL Server Management Studio is used to write all your queries, or you can view all the databases that you created, or all the tables that you created, or all the data that's there in the tables. Okay, so this is a tool that you will be using. It's a graphical user interface tool you will be using to work with the databases. So if I click on that, so this is the 2012 version. There are many versions like Microsoft SQL Server 2000, Microsoft SQL Server 2005, 2008, and then the latest version is 2012. Okay, so you can download that version from Google. I'll provide you the link where to download. So this is how the tool looks like. Okay, this is the starting window. Okay, so it gives a connection window where you have to connect to the database. Okay, so the server type you have to select is database engine. There are other server types also. Okay, but then all your databases will be saved in the database engine. Okay, and then the server name, whatever server name you provide when installing, that's the server name. Okay, and then the authentication. Authentication is, we have two different types of authentication to log into the SQL Server. Okay, so one is called Windows authentication, and then the other is called SQL Server authentication. So what is Windows authentication? Windows authentication uses Windows username and password. That means if a user has access to the Windows machine, okay, so this is my Windows machine, this is my laptop. Okay, I have access to this laptop. So if I have access to this laptop, then I will be having access to the SQL Server also. So that is called Windows authentication mode. And then what is SQL Server authentication mode? SQL Server authentication mode means SQL Server database engine will create a login and password, and then once that login and password is created, you can use that login and password to log into the SQL Server. Okay, so one is Windows authentication and one is SQL Server authentication. So whoever has access to that machine, okay, so he will be able to log into the SQL Server with Windows authentication mode. And for SQL Server, if you want to give SQL Server, you have to provide the username and password, which the database administrator of SQL Server, he will create a login and password, and then he will give it to you so that you can log in to the SQL Server. Okay, so that's the difference. And then if you are attending an interview, you might expect that interview question. Okay, so what is the difference between Windows authentication mode and SQL Server authentication mode? So let's say I am trying to log into the Windows authentication mode, and then click on connect. So once you are connected, you can see this is the management studio. Okay, and then in the left side you can see an object explorer. Okay, what is object explorer? Object explorer means it will show you all the objects in this particular server. Okay, so in Microsoft or in SQL Server or in any other database, each table or each view or stored procedures, okay, that's a different thing, I'll tell you about that, but each table is called object. Okay, so all that objects you can view in this toolbar. Okay, that means you are exploring some objects, so that is called object explorer. So this is your server. Okay, and then that is your version 11.0. okay, it's an internal version name, and then this Satish-vanilla is the username or the user who logged into this server. Okay. So if I click on databases, you can see many databases, system databases or database snapshots or testing, training. These are different databases which are already in this server. You can create any number of databases in one server. Alright. So let's see how do we work with SQL. Okay, so if you want to create any query or if you want to write any SQL code, you will click the new query window. Okay, and then once you click on that, a window will be opened on to your right, and then whatever code you want to write, you will be writing it here. Okay, all your code. And then once you have written your code, just select that particular code, and then if you click execute or F5, that code will be executed against the database. Okay. And then we will learn more features about this Management Studio once we start working with this Management Studio. Okay, or it's also called as SSMS. So let's get into the details of SQL. Okay, so let's see what are the basics of SQL. We have two different types of commands in SQL. Okay, so that is called DDL commands and DML commands. So what is DDL commands? DDL commands means data definition language commands. And then what is DML? Data manipulation language commands. Okay, so if you are working with SQL, you need to learn these two basic commands. These are most of the time you will be working with these two commands. Okay, so what is the difference between DDL and DML commands? DDL means data definition language. That means these commands you will use to create the structure or the definition. Okay, so here it says data definition. That means you use DDL commands to create the definition. And then DML means data manipulation. That means you will work with the data using DML commands. Okay, so in our example, let's say we created this table structure with table name as customers and then the column names as first name, last name, user ID and password. Okay, so that is called the structure, and then all the information which you entered here is called data. Okay, even in the address table, the name of the table is address, and then the column names are address, line 1, city, state, country, customer, user ID. All this is called definition. And then once you have the table definition, all these three records are called data. So if you want to create this data structure or data definition, you will have to use DDL commands. Okay, and then when you are trying to insert this data, okay, you will use DML commands. Okay, so what are these DDL and DML commands? So we have three different DDL commands called create, alter, drop. And then in DML we have insert, update and delete. Okay, so in this Excel we will just look at what are these DDL elements, what are these DDL and DML. Okay, so what is create? So for you will have to use create command to create the structure. Okay, that means you will provide the table name. Okay, so let's say table name as customers. Okay, and then the column names you will give. That is, you will have to use create command. Okay, not in Excel, but then when you are working with the databases. Okay, and then alter means you are altering the table structure. That means if you want to add another column, let's say date of birth, Okay, so the table structure is already there, but then you are trying to add a column. That means you are altering the structure of the table. For that purpose, you will use alter and then drop. Drop means just directly deleting the structure. If you just want to delete this complete sheet, what you will do, just right click and then delete. So in databases, you will use drop. And then similarly, DML, insert means you are trying to insert some information in the table. That means if you are trying to insert first record or second record or third record. So when you are working with the databases, you will use insert command. And then update. Update means when you are trying to update some information. If you want to update his last name as dland1. Okay. So you will use update command. And then for delete, you will use delete command to delete the record. So if you want to delete this customer completely, what you will do, just select that and then delete it, right? So in databases, you will use delete command. That's all. So it's very simple. And then once we start writing SQL queries, you will be understanding more, and then it's very easy to learn. All right. So do you have any questions from today's class?